Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the Roundtable number 46. I'm shooting the breeze with Brian Berletic, and I sent out the StreamYard invitation to a bunch of different people. So maybe they'll show up, maybe not. What happened was that Brian and I were just talking just privately on Skype, and with this guy, like, it's always the same. It's always so annoying. I start talking, okay, I'm going to talk like 2 minutes with the guy, just to coordinate stuff. And then like half an hour later, you just chews my ear off, because he's the talkative one. See, me, I'm just like this introverted, little sparrow, I'm a little, how's it going, man?
It's going okay. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much what happened. We were just trying to schedule for another roundtable we wanted to do. And we got talking about this, the arrival of this Chinese balloon over the skies of America. I saw the Gray Zone actually talking about it like as if it was an alien spacecraft, and the reaction and the Pentagon, the general's real super serious. And he's like, we're not going to talk about following it minute by minute, what its location is. It's so absurd. This is what America has come down to.
It's a weather balloon, man. I mean, it reminds me of that song from the 80s, 99 Red Balloons. You remember that pop tune? Or maybe it's before your time, right? During the Cold War, it was a pop song that was very popular. It was very catchy. And it was about, 99 red balloons fly by, and that just sets off all the interceptors and all kinds of military stuff. And it's just 99 red balloons, right? And I think the same thing about this stupid weather balloon, And I'm putting out a video on my Gonzalo Lira channel later today. And basically, I'm saying that this whole thing is an effort to what you call it, keep the fire burning insofar as the China conflict is coming. It's laying the groundwork. I'm actually posting a video on my Gonzalo Lira channel in a couple of hours about that precise issue. I mean, that's the only way I can possibly see it. And the fact that they don't take it down, they can take it down whenever they want to. They're just milking it at this point. I mean, do you agree?
Or they could give more details. They just keep calling it a surveillance balloon. I mean, well, you can survey many things. You can survey the weather. You can survey whales out at sea. I mean, what is it doing? What makes you think that it's a spy balloon? The fact that they knew that it was Chinese, how would you know that unless you tracked it all the way from China, which I don't think they did. I think China was already talking to them, and they decided to politicize it. Yeah. And you actually said something when we were talking before. You said this is like the Russiagate thing. You have to constantly stir up paranoia and hatred toward whoever the targeted group was. Russiagate, it was obviously Russians. Now it's time to ratchet up irrational fear, hatred, and of course racism towards China, because they've got a timetable now. It's war with China by 2025, 2026.
Yeah, that seems to be the state of play, that they are hell-bent for leather on 2025. And, do you think that there is any way to push this back?
Push back? Well, I mean, China is going to try to avoid it as best as possible, because they know time's on their side, and they know if they could just wait and avoid any sort of U.S. provocation, that the U.S. is doing more damage to itself now than any other country could possibly do. And they just need to sit back and wait. And the U.S. knows that, and that's why they're in a big rush, because they know 10 years from now, they're not going to be able to have a war with China over anything. And so it's now or never in their minds. And so I think it really is. It's up to us to educate people in the West, and it's up to China to be the rational actor in this conflict.
Well, yeah, but I mean, because this is my fear. You were talking about that CSI paper, CSIS paper, that was basically saying that the war with China would basically mean losing perhaps 3 or even 4 aircraft carriers, American aircraft carriers. And the United States has said repeatedly that sinking an aircraft carrier for them is like, nuking a city. And because of the change in America's nuclear posture, their willingness to carry out a first strike or first use of nuclear weapons to defend its interests, right? Or as a retaliation for some attack. If the Chinese, they've got a hard-on to sink an aircraft carrier, if they sink 1, 2, 3, 4 American aircraft carriers, is this going to be nuclear war? Me thinks yes. What do you think? I mean, honestly, if they sank 2, 3 carriers, the Gerald Ford, the Abraham Lincoln, and the Ronald Reagan, say, what would be the next stop for these people?
I mean, that's something they have to think about, because if they do start a war with China, it's not Iraq, it's not Libya. China can fight back. They can fight back with conventional weapons that if you read through that whole CSIS paper, and if you read through other papers by other U.S. think tanks, they admit that China has weapon systems that the U.S. has no equivalent of. They have all kinds of missiles that the U.S. doesn't have, because the U.S. was confined by various treaties they had with Russia. So neither Russia nor the U.S. developed these weapons. China wasn't part of any of those treaties. So they developed all of these missiles. And all of these missiles...
Which one specifically? I'm not aware of this, to tell you the truth. I'm fuzzy on the whole issue. Yeah, what kind of missiles did they develop? Yeah,
well, they had the intermediate range missile treaty between Russia and the U.S., which is why the Iskander only goes up to 400 or 500 kilometers, because any ground launched cruise missile that can go further than that would be a violation of the treaty. But the U.S. unilaterally walked away from all of those treaties, so I guess technically it's okay now. But Russia is still trying to stick to it more or less. China doesn't have to abide by any of those rules, and because China is where it is geographically, this means they can fire out further into the ocean at approaching U.S. aircraft carriers or other surface vessels with these type of missiles that they weren't prohibited from developing. So they have actually, CSIS also has a whole project looking at different missiles around the world. It's actually a very useful resource. Mm-hmm. And they talk about the wide range of missiles they have, and they cover the entire range. There is no range that was restricted for China. So the U.S. realizes that there's no way they're getting their ships anywhere near Taiwan, for example, if they fought a conflict over Taiwan. There's no way they're getting ships near there without them being sunk. Now you're saying if they sink these ships, would the U.S. resort to nuclear weapons? It's hard to know, because like we were saying, they're not acting rational these days. But we have to remember, China has nuclear weapons. They can retaliate. So is that something they really want to start doing? And then you suggested that maybe if the U.S. is already launching nukes and getting nuked, maybe they'll just say, well, why don't we just nuke everybody? And, like a fresh start. Let's have a fresh start. And it's like a kid is losing the game, so they just flip the board over and you start over again. So maybe that's what they're thinking. And this was a line of thinking by some during the Cold War. We can survive a nuclear war. We just come out of our bunkers, and if we prepare carefully, when we come out of the bunkers, we survived the nuclear winter. We will be in an advantage. We will rebuild faster, and we will have the advantage over them. Because what else could they do? The only other thing they can do is just gracefully accept that their hegemony over the planet is over, and find some sort of rational, constructive role to play within the multipolar world. That's the only other choice they have, which is a reasonable, rational choice that would actually benefit the vast majority of Americans and people in the West. But the people running the West, for them, they find this unacceptable.
Yeah, because if you look at it coldly, is China actually threatening any part of the United States, territorially speaking? No. Does China present any kind of clear and present danger to the United States or American interests? No. The only issue is Taiwan, and Taiwan is just a made-up issue, really, at this point, because we all know the economic integration between the island and the mainland, and we all know that eventually Taiwan is going to reunify with China. Barring the United States, it would be a process of maybe 5 to 20 years, but it's going to happen, and the people in Taiwan want it. So it's a non-issue. I think that the only reason we haven't reunified beforehand is because the Taiwanese saw the disparity of economic level before, but at this point there is no real disparity, and so what would be the point of not reunifying?
Well, actually, Angelo Giuliano, he was on my live stream yesterday, and he's in Hong Kong. He lives in Hong Kong. He has been to Taiwan personally, and he has traveled throughout China. And he brought up a good point. Right before 2014, the KMT party in Taiwan, they were moving toward greater economic integration, and the vector sum of everything that was happening was eventual peaceful reunification, incrementally, step by step, and always mutually beneficial for both the Taiwan and the rest of China. And then the U.S., as they were engineering the Euromaidan in Kiev, they were also engineering unrest in Hong Kong, and also in Taiwan. They had something called the Sunflower Movement, and this is how they got the Democratic Progressive Party into power, the one that is trying to promote independence and separatism, at which, by the way, they had a local election. And after years of this separatism and irrationally cutting off ties with the rest of China they're trying to isolate themselves from China or isolate China, but actually they were just destroying their economy. The voters said, no, we don't really like the DPP anymore. We're tired of this. We want you to focus on actual issues that impact our life. And this conflict that you're creating with the rest of China is going to endanger all of us. So it's pretty much a informal referendum against this idea, but the U.S. is going to push it anyway, just like Ukraine. They put these people into power who just have literally destroyed Ukraine now. And that is what happens when you have a client regime put into power. It doesn't represent your best interest, it represents someone else's interest at your cost.
Yeah. And the thing is, the whole China hysteria over the balloon, right? In the video I'm posting later today, that'll come up live after this broadcast, because we're only going to go for a little bit, an hour, maybe, or something like that, or whatever.
Yeah, I'm okay until like around 8 my time.
Right, and it's like 6 your time, right? So no, the what I posted there is that it's just like with the Russiagate thing, because the Democratic National Committee, they had that leak of the Podesta emails, right? And they didn't blame it on Seth Green, who is likely the culprit, and they didn't blame it on like some hacker group like Anonymous or something. They blamed it on the Russians, of all people. The Russians did it. And then Trump, he's a Putin agent, Russian agent. He works for the Kremlin, which is just nonsense. But it just laid the groundwork for this hatred of Russia, so that they could finally turn it up to 11 when this Ukraine conflict started. And it did work perfectly. Yeah, it worked perfectly. And so I feel that this thing, the balloon in and of itself was random. I think it was. And by the way, I suspect that these kinds of balloons floating from China or Japan or wherever, floating over the United States, the North American continent, I think it happens all the time. I remember in Chile, something along those lines, that some random balloon from, I forget where, I didn't really pay attention at the time, this was years ago, but they said that they had to bring down some balloon, that had a weather balloon that had floated from God knows where, because it presented a hazard for aircraft, for civil aviation. And it was like no big deal. It was like, one of these random accidents, and the Chilean Air Force, as I recall, went up and shot it down. And just strafed it a couple of times with a machine gun burst, and it went right down, and that was that. It was like no big deal. It was like trivial. I suspect that this kind of thing happens all the time, and focusing on it like this, it's an agenda. It has nothing to do with the freaking balloon, right?
Actually, if you read the BBC carefully, or any of these news articles about this balloon, they had the Pentagon. I think the Pentagon said this has happened several other times. But do you remember another time where they have obsessed over it to this degree? And by the way, I know that in America, because there's a lot of really anti-Chinese people in the United States.
Mm-hmm. I'm just showing what I'm eating to the.
This is the Ukrainian food goods that you buy from your local Ukrainian deli in Brooklyn.
Well, no, this is because like a lot of my critics claim that I'm actually in Vienna, and for some reason Vienna, I don't know quite know why, but see, I had to look all over Vienna for this particular jar with the where does it say? Right there, it says like Kharkov. It took me a while to find it, but I found it. But anyway, geez, fucking morons. But anyway, even somebody as intelligent as Tucker Carlson was obsessing about the fucking balloon, right? And the fact that the military is allowing it to float around, it just points to the fact that they want to milk this for all it's worth, right? And you were saying something that was really true, that there are a lot of people who are fairly sensible about the Ukraine conflict, but and they recognize that this is not America's fight at all. And yet, insofar as China, oh no, that's an existential threat. A nation farther away from the United States than Russia is, farther away from its vassal states, apart from Japan, of course. And they obsess about China more. And these people who are fairly sensible about the Ukraine situation, you throw hysterics over China. I don't get
think about this. I mean, I have been covering for the last year now how the Pentagon lies almost on a weekly basis during these press briefings about Ukraine. The most ridiculous things. I mean, if you believed everything that they said, right now you would be one of these two, because there are people having a meltdown now that Ukraine is not doing so well, because they honestly believed that it was going completely the opposite direction, because they were believing the Pentagon. The Pentagon was lying about absolutely everything, and they still are. And do we honestly think that they were lying every single week about Ukraine for the last year? But this about China, this is where they're going to be honest. Get real. I mean, the whole problem is the United States sees both Russia and China as obstacles to their primacy over the planet, and an obstacle to the impunity that they have enjoyed since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this is the reason why they are targeting China and Russia. And people should just ask themselves, if you agree with me that they lied about WMDs in Iraq, if they're lying about Ukraine, why are you repeating extremely dumb lies? And these are dumb lies when you really look into any of them. They're genociding the Uyghurs. What about Tibet? What about social credit score? If you just scratch under the surface of any of these are just as big of a bunch of lies as WMDs. And when you really think about it, these lies are getting dumber and dumber, because it's so much easier for ordinary people to independently look into these things and see for themselves.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is that they're starting to amp up the issue that the Russians use human wave tactics, because the war is being lost, right? And so they're saying, the Russians are winning, but it's because of human waves, because the Russians are just throwing troops and throwing away lives, because they're barbarians, they're uncivilized, because, they always talk about the civilized world. That, of course, excludes China and Russia, because, the Russians and the Chinese are uncivilized. Yeah, because the Chinese have not been civilized, for thousands of years. It's only recently that they learned how to, use the wheel and shit. Come on, man. And so like they're talking about the human waves, and something I didn't know, and only a few years ago I learned that the Russians during the Second World War, they did not use human wave tactics, but it was the excuse of the German generals to excuse away the fact that they had lost.
Yeah, they lost, exactly.
Yeah. And they
against the subhuman Slavs. And I think it was the Duran, Alex and Alexander over at the Duran. They called this like months ago. They said, when they do finally start, when it becomes unavoidable, inescapable, the truth of what's happening in Ukraine, that's what they're going to say. Just through sheer numbers, Russia has prevailed over the Ukrainians who were doing so well all along. Until the human wave started coming.
Yeah, I know. And like, what's his name? Jihadi Julian on Twitter. What's his face? Julian Ripke? I don't know how to
something like that. I can't pronounce his last name.
Yeah,
but I know who you're talking about.
he posted some video of basically like a clearing operation of a few Russian soldiers, and he called it
It was
like
like
a
three
human
guys
wave.
walking toward a trench, like three or four guys. They were walking toward the trench, and in the tweet, I remember that tweet because it was so absurd. He was saying something like, "Russians can't get tanks near these trenches, so the infantry have to go on foot because if the tanks get too close, Ukraine has superior anti-tank weapons." But then the Ukrainians don't have a machine gun to get these three guys just walking out in the open.
Or why not use the anti-tank weapon to blow away these approaching guys? So much code.
Yeah. And this is something that people have to be aware of when you're watching these videos. It is a vignette of what's actually happening. There is things happening before you saw this footage, before the footage starts and after the footage, and in the periphery where you can't see, where the camera isn't pointed. So you have to always keep that in mind when you're looking at something. You didn't see the BMPs and the tanks coming across the field and dropping the troops off near the trench, and the tanks firing into the trenches at different positions, or the artillery barrage before they even crossed the field in their tanks and BMPs. You didn't see that part, but that's usually what happens before these. You see Russian soldiers hopping into the trenches.
Yeah. So the explanation for the loss in Ukraine is going to be the Russians used human waves because they're barbarians and have no appreciation for the value of human life. That's going to be the go-to excuse, I figure. And oh, by the way,
wait. Someone said I popped my collar. This is just it's a new shirt, and like it's not. I would never pop my collar. So please don't think that of me. Don't think that of me.
Make chat happy. Come on, just once, just for a second, just for shits and giggles. If I had a collar, I'd pop it. But and yes, chat, I'm gonna get a new gray sweatshirt. Because this one is on its last legs. But no, I how can I put it? What we were talking about before we started the stream, that there doesn't seem to be any way to nip this China-American war in the bud, because the people in leadership positions are just so hell-bent for leather on this. I mean, they want it so badly, and there's no rational justification for it. I mean, none whatsoever. I mean, and fuck off with the whole thing of protecting Taiwan or some nonsense like that. There's no justification for it. They are risking a real nuclear war. I mean, I'm glad that insofar as this particular conflict here in Ukraine, they backed off that particular ledge of nuclear weapons. I mean, I'm actually not quite sure what was the trigger for them to step back from that ledge, even though Zelensky, fucking nutcase, he said publicly yesterday, I think, that the West should preemptively nuke Moscow. You heard that?
I did not hear that. I think I might have heard some. That wasn't recent, was it, or was it something you said recently?
Yeah, it was recently. Chat, why don't you
I didn't hear
out?
that.
If somebody has a link to the tweet, I'll post it and show it on screen, because I can't be bothered to find it right now, but I'll be happy to post it. Yeah. And he's saying, if you find it, Brian, because I'm on my shitty ass computer and it can't walk and chew gum at the same time. It doesn't.
Well, Newsweek has an article that says no, Zelensky didn't call on NATO to nuke Moscow in miscaptioned video. But if Newsweek is saying that immediately raises my suspicions that he did. But I'll have to look into it.
Yeah. Mm. And it just seems. And the other thing that I found incredibly funny, Putin was talking about German tanks crossing across the Ukrainian steppes again, and this just plays into the Kremlin's hands insofar as PR victories are concerned. I mean, it's like the West wants to shore up Putin's power. Do you think that Ursula von der Leyen and Anthony Blinken and Olaf Scholz are actual Kremlin agents? Because the way that they're acting, and Victoria Nuland too, because the way that they're acting, sometimes I wonder if they're being paid off by the Kremlin to shore them up, because everything they do plays right into the Russians' hands. It's like weird. It's like it's just bizarre. You know what I mean? Every time they think that they're throwing a curveball at the Russians. It's like right down the pipe, right in the middle of the strike zone. It's like the easiest fat ball in the world. I don't get it. I mean,
well, you've talked about this. You've had a lot of people on talk about this, about how the ruling class in the West, these are incompetent people who did not earn their way into their positions. They're not suitable for these positions. A lot of them have an educational background that is utterly useless, and their work experience even more so. And so, what do you do when you put someone like that up against people who have actually done things in their life? They were in jobs that had huge responsibilities and expectations of them that they fulfilled, which is why they are where they are now. How do you compete against people like that? You can't. And this is the result. So what America has working in its favor is this momentum of all of this power and this wealth that they've had over generations. But that is being squandered, which is unfortunate, because there's so much potential in the U.S. to use this wealth and this momentum to do other things for the American people and for the rest of the world.
Yeah. And the thing that I find very amusing is that the leadership class that we have in place today in the West, they are the ones responsible. Certainly their antecedents, but they themselves also are responsible for the deindustrialization of the West. And now that they need that industrialization to create weapons, to build the weapons necessary to create the arsenal of democracy, well, that industry is gone. The same people who today talk about the post-industrial economy as if it were a good thing, now they're realizing the actual effects of the post-industrial economy. You can't build shit. You don't have what it takes to become the arsenal of democracy. And that's something that I think that the leadership class is kind of like, what the hell? We thought that we had all this stuff behind us. But they, in terms of, equipment and gear and ammunition and all the rest of it, but all of a sudden they turn around and they realize that they don't have it. It's sort of like that little midget kid who's convinced that right behind him, he's got his 300-pound gorilla who can beat up anybody around, and he starts talking smack. And then he turns around and his 300-pound gorilla is really just a 90-pound weakling. It's like that. It's just screamingly funny, and they themselves are responsible for this hollowing out of the West. I just find it just the irony. The irony.
I would never recommend underestimating an opponent, but Mark Sloboda, you've had him on roundtables before. Very smart guy. He called this the battle between capital and commodities. When you're talking about economically, the West and Russia, for example. I was just watching a roundtable. I was doing some catch up today, and you had a guest on that was talking about. He said that the economy of Russia was like the size of Texas or something. But that's just in GDP, and GDP includes a lot of just made up numbers that are a result of America's ability to just print money at will. Actual industrial output is how you really should be measuring an economy. Industrial output and infrastructure, and in that case, the disparity between the U.S. and say Russia is not that great. I still think that America has an edge, obviously, but it's not the mismatch that people depict it as. And then in terms of between the U.S. and China, it's even worse. It's even worse. And now that China and Russia, who have a lot of mutual interest, even if the U.S. wasn't pushing them together by threatening them both, but because they are getting pushed closer and closer together, it just makes so much more sense for the commodities and the technology that Russia has, the technology and industrial base that China has to do this exchange. And how is the West going to compete with that? China alone, forget about Russia. China alone has a population greater than the G7 combined.
Yeah.
Do people think about the implications of that?
No, they don't. No, they look at them like the little yellow savages. They think of the Russians as the Slav savages, and the Chinese as the little yellow savages, and they don't understand at all the reality of today. That blindness. You can't talk them into understanding reality. They actually have to see it. Okay, and
learn the hard way.
Yeah, and they've invested so many chips insofar as this the situation is concerned. I mean, not just with what you call it with Russia, but with China, and they can't back off. I don't. I mean, look, as I told you previously, it's Thucydides' trap of the declining power lashing out at the emerging power, or powers, as the case may be at this time, lashing out at them, and trying to hold on when it's over, And I personally pinpoint it at when they repealed Glass-Steagall back in the 90s. That for me was kind of like the moment when things started really going south, because that was a terrible decision. It led directly to the 2008 financial crisis. And insofar as the global financial crisis, they never fixed it. They just kicked the can down the road by printing money instead of doing what they should have done, which was allow the banks to go bankrupt, recapitalize new banks, and just start from scratch. But they didn't. And now, the American economy is collapsing. The dollar is just, it's not worth the paper it's printed on, really, the cotton it's printed on. And on top of that, they are alienating the rest of the world, ensuring that they don't hold on to any dollars at all. You'd be crazy to, if you're a foreign sovereign wealth fund, to hold any dollar assets, because you can get sanctioned at a drop of a hat. Yes. And so their measures are driving the collapse of their own measures. The Americans' own measures are driving the collapse of the dollar, and with it, American prosperity. I mean, it's just insane. Hang on, I'm going to go and get some coffee.
Why are they doing? Why are they doing that? Is it because they realized that wasn't a good idea, but they thought they could bluff? They could bluff them by saying, we're going to drop all these sanctions on you. We're going to seize all your assets. And then they had to follow through and do it because nobody was blinking. And now it's now the bluff is over. And then they did what they said they were going to do, and it actually put them in a weaker position. It's almost like what they're doing with sending all of these tanks and talking about sending jets and all of these missiles. It's not the threat you think it is. If the people that you're trying to threaten have knowledge of how military matters work, it seems like the Russians have a little bit of an idea of how military matters work.
Well, I've said this a million times that the Italians are great at food and the French are great at fashion, but the Russians, they know how to wage war. They know what they're doing, and to bluff them was just stupid. It was just really stupid. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yes. Oh, no, I see people in the comment section talking about the tanks. They're talking about the Germans. Yeah, the German tanks, and something about the number 14 and also the number 88. And, I thought there's no way that that's true. And I saw like a PBS article where they're like,
"Oh, it was true. It was true."
And I'm just thinking, you could have just added or subtracted one tank. It wouldn't have made any difference, and you could have avoided that. And it's it's like they're getting off on that. And if I've been following this for a very long time. Since I was in the military, I was aware of people in the military who admired the Nazis. And I remember this documentary. You can find it on YouTube. One of the generals, McMaster. You remember that guy? He was involved in politics very recently, but he was in Desert Storm, and he was in some documentary, and they're talking about how they won this tank battle against the Iraqis, and an Iraqi officer taken prisoner of war saw a picture of, I think it was Rommel, like stuck inside an American tank. And he said, "Why do you have a picture of a Nazi in your tank?" And he's like, "Well, if you learned from him, you wouldn't have lost." Yes, in the comment section, H.R. McMaster, this general. There is this unhealthy obsession with Nazis and the Nazi military and their supposed military prowess. They lost the war. I don't know if they realize that they completely lost the war. And a lot of the things that they admire or romanticize about, when you actually dig into the details, it wasn't even close What is it even close to that? They're, there's like, they had the best tanks. No, they didn't. They had over-engineered tanks. They did not have the best tanks, because if they had the best tanks, I think things would have turned out a little bit differently. Your production and the quality of the tanks that you're making are directly linked. And if you don't have the ability if the tank is over-engineered and you don't have the ability to produce enough, then it's a bad design.
Yeah.
And people in the United States military right now romanticize about the Nazis. So when we see 1488 for them, that I can't rule out that they're doing that on purpose.
That it's just a wink and a nod kind of thing. Oh man.
No, they're obsessed with it. It's insane. And the Ukrainians, the extremists, I should say, because there's plenty of Ukrainians who are not into that. But the extremists, I mean, they don't care about the reality of these tanks being too complex for them and not doing anything to help them. Probably they're in more danger of being inside a German tank than they are an old Soviet era tank that they're more familiar with. They just like the idea of being in a German tank and killing Russians with it. That is a very appealing idea to them, which is why you see what they've done to Ukraine. They have completely destroyed the country.
No, and the Russians, if you look at it by every metric, by every category, economic, diplomatic, military, socially, they've won on every front. I mean, you look at it socially, for instance, right? And you say, oh, all these Russians, all these very clever Russians, smart Russians, Western-oriented Russians, they've left, right? Because they opposed the war. Well, yeah, what does that represent to the Kremlin? It means, number one, the political opposition left. It's become an opposition in exile, number one. Number two, the people who remain hate those guys, because they say, oh, they're unwilling to suffer as we are going to be suffering here in this NATO conflict. Okay, so it's unified socially, the people who have remained. And this notion that, the only the smart people left, and all the smart people left. That's not true. I know a lot of people personally who are very, very smart individuals who were pro-Western, pro-European, who after this conflict are like, fuck these Europeans and these Western.
Wake-up call, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of them are kind of like sheepishly saying to themselves and saying openly, and saying, Putin was right about everything. That joke about, my grandfather was right about everything? Yeah, Uncle Vova was right about everything insofar as the West is concerned. Yeah. And they don't understand that at this point, Putin is a moderate in Russia.
Yes, he is. And he's a very reasonable, measured person. He's depicted as a maniac and a despot by the West, but they do that to absolutely everyone. They did that to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. When you actually listen to President Assad talk, he's very intelligent, he's articulate, he speaks English, and when he talks, he's making sense and he's very specific. That's something that leaders like President Assad or President Putin or President Xi Jinping, they can get very specific because they actually understand what's going on, because they're actually in charge of stuff. Whereas in the United States, politicians are puppets. They get bills brought to them by lobbyists from these think tanks, and they just sign off on it. And they don't even, and they admit this, a lot of times they don't even read it. And that's why when you ask them questions and you try to drill down into any issue, you always come up empty, because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what's going on. Very, very few people in Washington can explain in detail what it is that they're really doing. Some in the Senate that are on some of these committees, they have a lot of details about, because they themselves are invested in trying to destroy Russia or China. But other than that, no. I think that says a lot.
It says a lot about the quality of leadership, because you're absolutely right. Assad, Xi Jinping, Putin, if you were to get them into a room and just the two of you and ask them specific questions about, what's this industrial production of weapon systems or industrial production of refrigerators or ovens or microwaves or whatever, they'd be able to tell you granular details. They actually know their shit. They know what they're doing. Yeah. And that's the thing about the Western leadership class. I mean, you look at Justin Trudeau. Do you think that fucker knows anything about anything? I mean, come on, okay? that guy, or as I call him, Justin Castro, because it's so obvious that he's actually Fidel Castro's illegitimate son. It's just fucking embarrassing at this point, right? You ask him anything about anything, he has no fucking idea. And these are the people who are pushing, totalitarian measures, because that's the thing too, that they keep talking about how China is a totalitarian state, Russia is a totalitarian state, blah blah. But you actually look at the measures that the West is implementing, and they are totalitarian. They're fascist. There's this crossover between corporate power and governmental power to repress the people. That's the definition of fascism. I mean, if you go back to Mussolini, what has he defined it? That is fascism, and they don't recognize what they are doing. It's just remarkable. I mean, chat, hit me with a +1 if you agree or not. That our leadership class are just a fucking buffoons who don't know shit.
But I'm glad that Justin Trudeau is running
Castro,
Canada, because then I can listen to Alex Christoforou do his impersonation of Justin, and Olaf having an argument over leopard tanks.
And sometimes
because if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry.
Yeah. I mean, people always ask me, why do I have my evil Darth Vader laugh or whatever, some like dark supervillain laugh, right? Why do I have it? Because if I didn't laugh about it, I just sit down and cry, because this is a catastrophe for our Western civilization. And we're all a product of the Western civilization. My audience, you, myself, we grew up in the West with the values of the West, the intellectual history of the West, the philosophy of the West, the religion of the West. We are Westerners, whether we like it or not, and we are seeing the collapse of our civilization brought about by the sheer incompetence and arrogance of our leadership class. And I think too that I've mentioned this before, that for various reasons and accidents of my upbringing, I had the opportunity to join that leadership class, and for reasons of my own, I just turned away in disgust from them because they were so hypocritical. And now I see that hypocrisy that I saw in the early 90s. It's just full bloom. And my thinking is that it's a part of a malignant moral vision that has taken hold of the West. And the malignant moral vision is very, very simple. It's, I will do whatever is good for me and that benefits me, so long as the cost or the penalty is not too high, so long as I can get away with it. And so that's how they act, in this malignant moral vision of just doing whatever is expedient, whatever helps me or my group, or whatever is going to, make me the most money or improve my position. And fuck any principle, fuck anything, anything in terms of fairness or decency even. That's their moral compass. It's a malignant moral vision, and that's the conclusion I've reached.
Yeah, and it's short-sighted selfishness. If they were intelligent and forward-thinking, but still extremely selfish, they would realize that actually creating a balance of power around the globe is what ultimately benefits themselves. They'll still be rich and powerful and influential, and they will be part of a system that is sustainable. And that is what differentiates a superpower, a sustainable superpower, and an empire that is going down the drain. That is what differentiates them. And right now in the West, we don't see this, even a glimmer of this mentality at all.
Let's talk about Bakhmut, okay? Because this is how I'm looking at it. And you tell me, because you are much more on top of the details, because like I always tell you guys, chat, I'm a big picture guy, and Brian is like, look at those big brains of his. You can practically see them through his skull, man. And he looks at all the data and all the weapons and everything. And this is what it seems like to me. And so, Brian, in my account, please correct me whenever I'm wrong, that basically the Zelensky regime has decided to bet the ranch on Bakhmut. And they are still shipping soldiers into it and trying to defend what is ultimately indefensible. And that the Russians are essentially seem to be encircling it, slowly but inexorably. As I understand it, at this time, there's just a single road that resupplies Bakhmut, the single road that they could use to exit Bakhmut and withdraw from Bakhmut. But rather than withdrawing, they're just pouring more and more troops and materiel into Bakhmut to hold on to it at all costs. Is that an accurate assessment up to this moment?
That seems to be accurate. Yes.
Okay. And so my further inference from this is that it could turn out to be that Bakhmut is the battle that ultimately breaks the Ukrainian armed force. Would that be a reasonable assessment? Because I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of troops there at this point, right? That are basically being surrounded. Is that correct?
It's one possibility. There's another possibility, and I think people should keep an open mind to this, that Ukraine is sending absolutely everything that they can spare to Bakhmut.
Yeah.
And there's a huge amount of men and equipment, but they also have a reserve that they're not touching because they're saving that for something else. And I mean, obviously,
hang on. How big is that reserve?
Who knows? I mean, that's something that you and I, we can't possibly know. We don't have, I mean, I wish I had my own satellites and everything and a team to analyze that for me, but I don't. So I have to keep my mind open to multiple possibilities. And as things unfold, I can say for more certain, with more certainty in which direction it's going. Is it going toward this option or that option? If you look at Russia, what are they doing? Because maybe they don't even know 100% for sure. They're pushing in the south, along the line of contact in Zaporozhye and now towards Vuhledar, and they're not just driving, down the road with no resistance. There are still Ukrainian forces there that are capable of resisting. It could be a couple of different. Now there's a subset of possibilities. Now they're in the south. Are they doing recon by force to just see what is left of the Ukrainian military, how much they can mobilize and send there to stop Russian forces? Are they shaping the battlefield to prepare for an actual offensive? Because this isn't the actual offensive. The first couple of days, so that was another possibility. It could have been the beginning of their offensive, although usually there's a lot of shaping and preparation that goes into it. And they could be holding, they're there doing a holding action where they want to just keep those troops there to prevent them from going to Bakhmut to reinforce troops. So there's a lot of possibilities, but what we do know is that there's Ukrainians there that are putting up resistance. So it's not quite collapsed yet. They still have reserves. The big question is how many? What's left? And the equipment is a huge factor. I've actually got the list right here of everything the Biden administration is sending in terms of additional security assistance for Ukraine. I noticed that usually for 155 millimeter artillery rounds, they provide a number. This time they didn't. And that's probably because the number is
so low.
It's hard to say comical, but so low. They're talking about, so there's USAI. USAI, what does that exactly stand for? The Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. This is when the U.S. government doesn't have it in their stockpile. So they begin the process of drawing up a contract with an arms manufacturer to get this equipment to them. And on the list is spare parts for counter artillery radars and also 20 counter mortar radars, which are also counter artillery and rocket radars. 20 is what I do believe the U.S. has already sent Ukraine. And I've been looking at the daily updates from the Ministry of Defense of Russia, and they've been knocking these things out almost every single day. So they have no counter battery radars left. And so the U.S. has to order more to send them because they don't have enough to just send it. Exactly. Who knows? It's not going to be there this week, next month. Maybe not even until like almost the end of the year. Who knows?
A lot of people are talking in Washington about like winding this down by the summer. I tend to think that by the summer, this thing might be over and the Russians have captured the whole thing. Because look, my position remains that the only reason that the Russians would assemble such an enormous force around Ukraine is because it's an occupation army. That's the only, when you're talking about upwards of 600,000 men who are surrounding this country, because these 600,000 men are not in combat, they're just waiting. And so you have to ask, why would they have so many men? And if you're talking about a country that demographically must be in the range of between 20 and 25 million people, Estimates vary, because of the number of refugees. It's not a clear accounting of them. But let's say between 20 and 25 million. 600,000 a man force would be pretty much enough to occupy such a country. Would you agree? I mean, what's the normal ratio of civilians to occupation army? I thought it was something like 100 to 1 or something.
I don't know. That is a good question. But of course, for Russia, this is very different than, say, the United States in Afghanistan or Iraq, because Ukraine used to be part of Russia. They all speak the same language. They're just right over the border. I mean, I know Russian people who are from Ukraine. Originally, on my father's side, they are from some part in Ukraine, but they're Russian, and they had to leave because even back 100 years ago, they had like this anti-Russian thing that the West was promoting, even back then, apparently. So it's not going to be like the U.S. in Iraq. It's a totally different scenario.
Yeah, I mean,
it's more like Russia dealing with Chechnya. It's going to be more like that, and I think you bring up a good point. At the beginning of the conflict, the demographics were totally different, and I used to explain to people who are like, oh, how come Russia, if they have such a great army, how come they didn't just win in like 3 days? They were supposed to win in 3 days. There's no way, because they went into a country that is physically bigger than Iraq in 2003, bigger population, bigger military, better trained, better equipped. There was no way. And they went in with a smaller force than the U.S. went into Iraq in 2003.
A lot smaller.
Yeah, a lot smaller. And so,
well, it's the thing
that they have made tremendous gains considering that.
Yeah. I always think that the original Russian expeditionary force, let's call it that started on February 24th. People say that it was a complete failure, blah blah blah. Well, it wasn't, because they did capture the entirety of the South, and so they captured up to Kherson. I mean, the lightning strike and just like sweep and take it over like that. It worked in the South. It didn't work around Kiev, and it didn't work around Sumy. But insofar as the South, every place from the Kharkov Oblast all the way to Kherson, it worked like a charm. So to say that it was a complete failure, a complete fiasco, that is to misunderstand what they were doing originally. Go ahead.
And I think that they were well aware that the probability of them getting everything in, shocking them into surrender right away. I think they realized that the probability was very low, which is why they were already prepared to fight this long war that we see playing out right now. And I remember back in the beginning, people were like, because they saw that the Russians couldn't accomplish this as quickly as they thought they were trying to. And the Pentagon themselves would remind reporters that the Russians brought in huge amounts of men and equipment and munitions just sitting at the borders, huge, like mountains of it, because they were prepared for this to go on for a long time. It was a roll of the dice. If it worked, it would have saved so much time, trouble, and lives. But if it didn't work, they were fully prepared for that. I mean, I think this was actually the main conflict that they were preparing for. That was just a what if. Maybe if we could, it's worth the risk.
This points to the differences between the Russian leadership and I would suppose the Chinese leadership as well, compared to the Western leadership. That the Russians have contingencies. They're always thinking, okay, we're going to try this, but we're going to have, just in case, we're going to have plan B, C, and D, just in case that this plan A doesn't work out. If it doesn't work out, fine, we'll just go to plan B and plan C, as the case may be. Whereas in the West, they just rolled the dice. They just hit the gas. They hit it up to 11, and they just hope for the best. And if it doesn't work out the way that they hope, they have no contingency, and they're not even prepared for the contingency.
It's so weird, because when you watch what they're doing, it really does seem like they did not do any contingency planning and preparation from the very beginning. So like they were trying to overthrow the Syrian government. It wasn't working. I mean, to a certain extent, they did prepare a lot of other things in advance. Mm-hmm. But in other ways, they didn't. They didn't say, well, what if this happens or that happens? Because when you're in the middle of a war and you're trying to create an army from scratch, you're trying to train them in Jordan or in Turkey, and you think you're going to send them into Syria after Syria has what do you call it when you're exercising that first 15 minutes, you feel like you're gonna have a heart attack and die, and then after that you get like your second wind, right? You get your second wind, and then you're in it until the end. Once Syria got its second wind, there was no way that was going to work. So why didn't they prepare something like that beforehand? Because it's like you say, maybe they're just making it up as they go along.
They do.
That's what it looks like.
Well, I think also there's a weirdness insofar as an American mentality kind of thing. You know, we're in it to win it, right? That's always their mentality. And so if you say in the planning stages, you say, okay, this is our plan, but shouldn't we prepare in case we lose, or this doesn't work out, doesn't go our way? And then they say automatically, oh, you're a defeatist. You don't have what it takes or something. It's sort of like normal caution is taken as a sign of weakness, which is very bizarre if you think about it. I mean, do you agree with me that this seems to be a prevalent mentality in the West, especially among the Americans, that if you're going to go for A, but you say, look, let's be smart and have B and C and D prepared just in case, and that's just automatically dismissed, and you yourself, for having suggested this, are considered not fully committed, or just, some bullshit like that. You see the mentality that I'm talking about. That seems to be the mentality. Throwing caution to the winds.
Exactly. And I think Larry Johnson, former CIA, he was talking about how, you have to be a team player, which means just agree with everything they say. And you're like, well, yeah, but what if? I mean, you could say it was your idea or something. I don't care. But like, if this happens, you need to be able to do this. And they don't even want to talk about it, which that tells you that these are people who are being political instead of actually doing their job rationally, objectively, to the best of their ability.
I don't think it's even political. I think it's childish, a fundamental immaturity.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like you and I as adult men, we have our plans, we have our little schemes and our little hopes and dreams, but we're always thinking, well, what happens if it doesn't work out? How do I, it's only children who refuse to consider the possibility that it might not work out in their favor. You know what I mean?
And when they plan, they just plan for not the worst case scenario, the best case scenario with no exceptions, and then they get bent out of shape that it didn't work. Yeah. That is kind of what they're doing.
Yeah, it's a childish mentality. It's an immaturity, a fundamental immaturity. I mean, now
what we were we were talking about Bakhmut getting encircled, and I just kind of want to remind people that the reason they're fighting so hard over Bakhmut is because the way they fortified this line from Avdiivka outside of Donetsk city all the way up to Seversk, which includes Bakhmut and Soledar, it is so heavily fortified. There's no position that they can fall back to that will be that heavily fortified. So when they punch a hole through this line, say they take Bakhmut, they already have Soledar, so there already kind of is a hole. It's like if you look at ancient warfare, the shield wall works because the soldier to the left and right of the soldier in the middle is providing protection for him. He's providing protection for the other soldiers. If there's a hole in that wall, now you already have two flanks all the way to the left, all the way to the right. You punch a hole, now you have four flanks that are vulnerable. Right. And once you work your way into that hole, you can roll up the whole formation. That's why you try to avoid getting flanked, but you doubly try to prevent a hole being created in the line, because then that creates more flanks and more possibilities for your formation. So when you think about the defensive line, now we're talking hundreds of kilometers and entire cities as part of this defensive network, and they overlap and they're layered. But if you punch a complete hole through that, now you're in positions that they didn't prepare for, that they're less able to defend against. This creates problems. And this is what happened at Popasnaya, and this was what led to Lysychansk and Severodonetsk falling to the Russians, because that was a hole, and from that hole they rolled up that defensive line. They fell back to this line. They kind of already had this line, but they fell back to this one.
Yeah, and so the issue becomes, if this line, if they punch a hole through it and the Russians breach it, um, militarily, okay, there are two issues. There's the political one and the military one. Politically, I think this would be devastating for the Zelensky regime because they have bet psychologically so many chips. They've been talking about Bakhmut for so long that if all of a sudden the headline reads, Bakhmut has fallen, and there's pictures of some Wagner types, with the Russian flags right in the middle of Bakhmut and no gunfire anywhere around, then holy shit, politically, this is a disaster. Okay, but what about military? If Bakhmut is captured, what would the Zelensky regime forces realistically be able to do? Would they fall back to the Kramatorsk line?
Well, that is what they would have to do, and I don't. I'm not on the ground there at Kramatorsk. I can't tell you how well the defenses are prepared. From my understanding, Kramatorsk has been serving as kind of a command center for what has been going on in Bakhmut. So then you have to move everything back. If you move your troops back to Kramatorsk, from Kramatorsk, your command has to get moved somewhere else because you don't want that on the front line. And so that is really bad for them. And all the while, to try to hold Bakhmut, they're feeding their army into this black hole, basically. And they cannot get trained manpower back, and a lot of this equipment they're not going to be able to get back in any reasonable amount of time. So,
and what would happen
militarily?
Yeah, and what would happen if they completely encircled Bakhmut and just cut them off and have Mariupol 2 happen in Bakhmut? I mean, I would think that psychologically, just militarily, on all fronts, it would be a catastrophe. And I don't see how they would recover from that.
That would be a catastrophe. And at some point, because Zelensky visited Bakhmut, it's an insignificant, strategically irrelevant town, small town. That's what they were saying. But he took the risk to go visit, or at least he pretended to take the risk of going to visit this frontline city. For what purpose? So eventually, either he's got to give the order for them to leave. How's that going to look? Because he said no other Ukrainian cities were going to fall after Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. So now this is Bakhmut falling, and it would have been his order for them to retreat. So is he going to, for the political purposes, keep those troops in Bakhmut until the very bitter end? I don't know.
It looks like that's the game plan. Also, I would think that Zelensky must be feeling extremely nervous because in this purge that happened over the last few weeks, right, that started with Arestovich being kicked out or leaving, depending on how you look at it. And then the helicopter crash with the interior minister, and then the subsequent purges for corruption, which is like laughable. It's like that famous line from Apocalypse Now, charging somebody with corruption is like handing out speeding tickets at the Indy 500, And so it seems that, but the people who were purged seem to be the people closest to Zelensky. The only guy he seems to still have in his corner is the Minister of Defense, Reznikov. If Bakhmut falls, Reznikov is toast, and Zelensky would be completely isolated. What do you think happens from there?
Well, there's a lot of interesting theories about what's going on in terms of what is pretty much obviously a purge, who's doing it, and for what purpose. At first, it seemed like maybe it could have been, to isolate Zelensky, all these people that were around him. Now maybe it's to make sure that the composure of the Ukrainian government is just right, so that if the U.S. does try to divest from this, they don't have people in Kiev, extremists, who are going to try to go against it and disrupt it. Maybe so. Maybe they're trying to create a lineup in Kiev that is going to be able to go down the exit ramp, so to speak, instead of people that are going to claw and kick and scream.
You mean claw and kick and scream in the media towards the West?
Yeah, well, no, kick and scream towards ending this, just admitting that it's over.
Wait, I'm not clear what you're saying.
So they got rid of all of these people around Zelensky. They
Right.
want to create a government that is composed of people that will be able to make the decision to say, all right, it's enough. It's
And they
over.
surrender.
Forget about it. Yeah, and then they more or less they surrender, or at least they start negotiating. But if you have some of these people in Kiev right now, they're not going to do that. So you have to get rid of them. If that's the plan.
I actually thought that the people that they had that were purged were, for lack of a better term, the doves, the ones who might be more willing to negotiate.
That's possible. Yeah.
Okay,
That's possible too.
So nobody's really sure what's going on.
It might be the opposite. Yeah,
exactly.
It might be the opposite. They're like, get rid of all of these people because we want to the last. We said last Ukrainian, we meant it. So let's make sure we got team players in there in Kiev that aren't, Zelensky.
Yeah, because Zelensky seems to be a guy willing to go down with the ship, right? I mean, he seems to be one of the extremists. And so yes. I had the impression that it was more like, because the people that they got rid of in the purge were more basically, TV people, the people that Zelensky brought along,
Some
right?
of them,
yeah, and so I thought that they'd be more the kinds of guys that are like, okay, we're really losing, so let's save our asses and negotiate with the Russians. I personally think that the Russians are not going to negotiate with anybody. I think that at the start of this conflict, the Russians had a vested interest in making sure that nothing happened to Zelensky and his regime because they wanted somebody with whom to negotiate. But I think that at this point, especially with all the revelations that Minsk was just a way to buy time and the insurmountable Russophobia coming out of the West, I think the Russians have made up their minds, we're not going to negotiate with anybody. We're going to go for unconditional surrender. That is my thinking, and it's been my thinking for a while now, that the Russians, they won't believe anybody who wants to negotiate with them, even if they were acting in good faith or just trying to salvage something from the situation. I think the Russians are like, we're past that.
And I think Russia should be very careful, even if it looks like they're looking for an exit ramp. I would just continue as if, no, that's just a smokescreen for escalation.
Yeah,
they want to escalate, and they want it to blindside them. So they're acting as if they're looking for an off ramp. And I mean, can you imagine Poland or the Baltic states? What would their reaction be if even though Washington ultimately holds their leash, what would their reaction be to Kiev giving up at this point and accepting the inevitable?
Yeah, no, I don't think that there's going to be any negotiated settlement. It's unconditional surrender, and that goes back to my original point, or my earlier point, which is that this army that the Russians have amassed, it's an occupation force. That's the whole purpose of it. It's as simple as that. I think that they're waiting for the moment when the Zelensky regime forces just ultimately give up the ghost, and then they just sweep in and with these quote unquote big arrow offensives, and just grab Lviv, grab Kharkov, grab Sumy, and encircle and potentially take Kiev and install their own regime.
Yeah, but I think as long as the U.S. has other potential proxies to throw in, I think that is always a possibility. I can see Poland going in to try to pick up where the Ukrainian forces left off.
I agree.
Or a coalition. This is something that I worry about. I also worry about some sort of what do you call it? A buffer zone in Western Ukraine. I think that is still a possibility. I cannot imagine them in any way, even anything that resembles graceful acceptance of what is really happening. So I think they're going to try to do something. They're going to, like you say, they always think they're going to throw a curveball, and it always goes exactly where Russia is ready. I mean, that Russia is preparing for NATO intervention into Ukraine. They are preparing for it. They're talking about these longer range rockets for the HIMARS, which that doesn't seem to be
smart.
That doesn't seem to be coming. It doesn't even seem like it's coming together the way they claimed it was. But let's just say that it does, and let's just say that they have the ATACMS on their way. I mean, don't you think Russia has contingency plans that they've handed down to even field commanders and said, look, if they get these missiles, if these missiles start showing up, This is what we have to do. Ukraine already admits that Russia has adapted to the HIMARS, so they're going to adapt to these other weapon systems. And at the end of the day, Russia still has many more, much more capable weapon systems than these ground-launched small diameter bombs, and also the ATACMS. Even if they send the ATACMS, the Iskander has a longer range, and of course the Russians are more familiar with them and better at using them. So this is Ukraine's always going to be one step behind, no matter what they do, no matter what the West sends.
Yeah, and it's a lost cause. I agree with you that the Polish variable is the issue right now. If the Poles on their own, or perhaps with the Romanians somehow, they cobble together some force, some expeditionary force of their own, they don't have a hell of a lot of soldiers, quite frankly. So, I question how effective they would be. And of course, the Russians have said, you cross the border into Ukraine and you're a fair game, and we're going to hit you, and we're going to hit you hard, and we can do it, which is what I always go back to Yavoriv. That was a lesson from that particular escapade in early March. And, the Poles to get involved in this would be suicidal for them. And the Russians right then and there would cut off all, because there is still continued trade between Russia and Poland, this dirty little secret, right? But that's when they would cut everything off and really hurt the Polish economy. And insofar as those soldiers, those guys would be dead meat. I mean,
that is a good point. I mean, that is the thing. Russia has reserved many options with which they can escalate. So cutting off all gas, that is a possibility. Really creating a problem in terms of energy for them if they were to do that. And I'm sure that there are other things that they are holding back. I mean, there's a lot of hardware that they have been holding back. There's a lot of assets that they could be using that they're not. And of course, their production. And of course, if they just redirected, they're doing cruise missile attacks on the energy infrastructure. If they just transfer that to whatever Poland moves into Ukrainian territory in terms of command and control and everything, I mean, I think it would be a disaster. It would be a disaster for them.
It's like, the gang that can't shoot straight. By the way, did you hear about Anthony Blinken? He floated a peace proposal via the Egyptian foreign minister who flew out to Moscow to deliver it. What the hell? Is
that confirmed, or is this speculation?
No, it's confirmed. The Russians themselves confirmed it. They went out and said, Lavrov said in this big speech, or not speech, he gave an interview. And he basically laughed them out of the room, because the Blinken peace plan was that, Russia demilitarizes Crimea and removes its troops from the south of Ukraine. Right there, you're like, Jesus, man. I mean, come on. And it's all for the optics, all for appearance sake. Jesus Christ. You know what I think of that emphasis on appearances and optics are concerned? I find it so bourgeois. Just so concerned with appearances as opposed to reality. It's so bourgeois, petit bourgeois. I just find it repulsive on a personal level. I mean, if you're going to go in with a peace proposal, be serious about it, be a man about it, but not play to the peanut gallery. Because ultimately, the peanut gallery, how do they influence this situation? In no way whatsoever. Who are you trying to curry favor with by floating an irrational and pathetic peace proposal like this?
Well, I mean, optics is one of the few things. Again, I don't want to underestimate what they're capable of doing, but optics really is one of the most important things that they have that had until now had been going for them. But just like any of these, just like the Arab Spring, just like a lot of these things, after the initial public interest in it, and they get hooked on all of the lies and the narrative, the longer it drags on, the more and more people wake up. Once you wake up to all of this, you cannot go back to sleep to it.
Yeah.
And this is a problem. So every day that goes by, that their ability to leverage the narrative, regardless of what's actually happening in reality, that diminishes. And so this is the same problem they had in Syria, to the point where people either didn't care or they were fully aware of what the U.S. was doing, and the U.S. really didn't have it. I mean, like, how are you going to get the people on your side to go, invade or go to war with Syria? It would be very difficult to do that because you just let too much time go by, and they couldn't do it sooner because they weren't ready for it, or they didn't think that they had to do it.
That's the thing. Again, to go back to that point, they never plan for if things don't work out as they plan. That's the thing I find juvenile. Oh man. Okay, so
I see someone in the comment section asking about Alex. I had a gentleman named Alex on my channel talking about Russian battalion tactical groups, and they said, how could he be Russian if he has like a perfect British accent? But I mean,
of course you can be.
I mean, like, I know that like the Hollywood stereotype Russian, is barely speaking English, and he's talking about vodka and bears and stuff. But in reality, and I see Thai people who have studied overseas, they come back with accents, and they can speak English fluently. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Hey, cabrón, man, I be Latino. I come from Chile, cabrón. South America. And my English good, man, cabrón. What you talking about, man? I ain't got no accent. Chingaja.
Yeah.
This is so parochial. That notion that how can he speak perfect English if he's Russian? I mean, as if
it's something. Yeah, it's something that happens because especially Americans, they don't get out much, out of the country. They don't see the rest of the world. I used to be exactly like that. I was so ignorant at one point. This was when I was in the military, mind you. I thought Thailand was like somehow part of China or something. I honestly didn't know anything at all about Thailand because I was just an ignorant American. I mean, there really is a huge problem in America with ignorance and the education system.
Furthermore, they've been deliberately dumbed down. I mean, you talk to college graduates today, and they're fucking idiots. I mean, they don't know a goddamn thing about anything.
Yeah.
I mean, really, they know their diversity claptrap, but beyond that, they cannot talk to you intelligently about any kind of American history or world history. But I think that the principal drawback of American education is not that they're ignorant about facts. They are unable to understand that other people have very good motivations for whatever it is that they're doing. They don't seem to understand that people act rationally. And that, for instance, insofar as this conflict and Putin and the invasion, the Russians were not acting irrationally. You have millions of people doing stuff in Russia for this conflict. Why do you think it is? It's not that they just decided out of the blue, and it's not that they're following Putin robotically. If anybody who seriously disagreed, if there was a substantial group of people within Russia that seriously disagreed with these measures, Putin would have been deposed by now. That's not the case. On the contrary, they're all supporting him because they all understand what's going on and they are rational actors. And it's a weird blindness that American education imposes, an inability to see that the other guy has very rational reasons. They always automatically ascribe somebody else who is doing something against their best interest, against American best interest, as irrational, monster, crazy people.
Yeah,
it's very bizarre, and it's been, I think, deliberately inculcated in American education, to tell you the truth. I think that it's not a feature, it's not a bug, it's a feature, that they want to have this population of so-called educated people. I'm talking about Ivy League kids, right? Who are just blind to the rational motives of their opponent. And
college educated.
You know how I find it, the one word that for me nails it is the word behavior. We're not going to tolerate this behavior. Behavior is what you ascribe to animals, that they act in ways that you, because you are not of the same species, do not understand. But people do not behave. It's good behavior, bad behavior. That might be an infant, right? But not even an infant. It's really like an animal. You the other person is acting in certain ways, thinking in certain ways. They are not behaving, because the word behavior intrinsically implies that it is irrational. Whenever I hear that word, it just sets off alarm bells to me, because it tells me that the person using that word does not ascribe rational human motivations to their opponents. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, they do this to everyone. I was just talking about President Assad in Syria. I mean, the disparity between how he's depicted by the Western media, and if you just listen to him speak, listen to the things that he's saying, go look up some of the things that he's saying, and you tell me, is he really a vicious monster, or to the point of being a movie villain, or maybe we're just being lied to, because the government has been lying to us about every single one of these wars. And it's always the other guy's fault. No one thinks about, the U.S. is in somebody else's country, yet another country invading and killing people. Are we? Is it really everyone in the world's got a problem, or maybe we're the ones that got the problem? That never dawns on us.
Hans, are we the baddies? They never ask themselves that question. Go ahead.
Well, there's some questions in the comment section. Well, I mean, the thing with Alex is that he's anonymous. He's if he is actually Russian and he's trying to do something in the media, do you want people to know who you are? For the longest time, I was anonymous. I wrote under a pen name, and I didn't do videos. It's like almost 10 years, for the very same reasons. Out of concern. At the end of the day, though, just listen to it. So what Alex was talking about doesn't depend on him being Russian or in the Russian military. The things he was saying, well, he's talking about the Russian Battalion Tactical Group. These are all things that if you do your own research, you will find out that it's true.
Okay.
The things he was talking about, how Russia prepares young people for military service even before conscription. These things are true. You can look these things up. You can see for yourself. People are asking me about this contract, the Thai government's contract with Pfizer. I mean, this might be something I get it because Gonzalo and I, we were talking to begin with, because we're trying to schedule a live stream about healthcare and Big Pharma and gene therapy. And maybe I'll get into that. Thailand is one of these countries where they want to make healthcare accessible to everyone in the country, and they go through great lengths to do that. They have a government pharmaceutical organization that will take an AIDS medication that the West is selling way overpriced, like 1,000 times overpriced. They know how to make it. They just make it themselves and give it to people. And then they take the money that it's worth and they offer that to the company. It's compulsory licensing. And the U.S., the embassy, the U.S. government, the Chamber of Congress has been putting pressure on Thailand for years and years, and not just Thailand, India, many other countries do this because they want to just rip off everyone. Pfizer wants to take everybody's money and push their poison onto you. This is what they're criminals. They're drug dealers in lab coats. That's what they are.
Basically. By the way, we're going to do a devoted live stream to this particular topic, perhaps next Saturday at some point.
Yes.
But we are definitely doing it. It's on the menu. But I wanted to come into something else that I've been hearing. I don't know if you've been following this, Brian, but a lot of farmers are saying that they changed their feed for their chicken, and the chickens aren't producing eggs anymore. And at the same time, there have been the largest egg factory in the United States went up in smoke. What the hell is going on? This has been going on for 3-4 years now, where different food production enterprises are just going up in smoke. No victims, but it's just one of those things kind of thing. And now, a lot of farmers, and on YouTube, you hear a lot of this, a lot of people who have not just industrial farmers or perhaps are artisanal farmers who have a flock of 1,000 birds. No, I'm talking about people who have say 20 birds, 50 birds. And they're posting videos that they're saying, the chickens weren't producing any eggs, where before they were producing one every day and a couple of hours, right? And all of a sudden, no eggs with this new feed. It was a Purina feed. And then they changed the feed and no problem. I mean, it seems, I mean, I don't want to put on the tinfoil hat, right? I'll just keep on the orange hat for the time being, but it seems as if it's a deliberate effort to interrupt the supply of food so that eggs remain at $10 a carton or something like that, where you basically $1 an egg, whereas before it was $1 for a dozen eggs.
Yes, it's hard to tell, but I mean, I was getting ready for the healthcare stream for today. So I already have this, and I printed out parts of the Department of Justice talking about what Big Pharma gets caught doing. These are felonies that they are committing. And what they do is they pay the Department of Justice to resolve them. Nobody goes to jail and they continue doing business. So essentially, they'll talk about them bribing and this and that and all of these schemes. They have these elaborate schemes. So Gonzalo, it sounds like you're a conspiracy theorist, but they do have these elaborate schemes that the Department of Justice lays out crystal clear what they were trying to do to create demand for products that are useless or that don't work or aren't necessary. Sell medication to people for treating things that they weren't approved for, things like that. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And essentially what these companies do is they get caught by the Department of Justice, bribing and stealing and lying and killing people, basically. And then to resolve the felony, they just pay the Department of Justice. So in reality, it's just another bribe for them. It's just the price of doing business for them. It's insane. And the agricultural, big ag and big pharma are very closely linked, and they do the exact same sort of thing. So no, Gonzalo, I would have to look into it, but I wouldn't even for a minute doubt it.
I just got an email from Alex at History Legends. He might pop on. I hope he does. Because it would be fun to have him on, because like I sent the invitation to a bunch of random people and let's see who shows up. So you're agreeing with me that it might not be, it might not be a conspiracy. It might be a conspiracy fact, not conspiracy fiction.
I mean, big ag is also criminal. They're liars. They manufacture, there's manufacturing consent just in general. They manufacture consent, scientifically, because they just pay off doctors and researchers and regulators to look the other way or to agree or to pretend that they looked into it. Yeah. And it checks out and it doesn't. And they got caught doing this with Big Pharma, and Big Ag does this too. They used to have this guy, he's probably still around, Kevin Folta. He's some fake academic from the University of Florida. And he was always pushing GMO to the point where it was suspicious. It was like, nobody cares about GMO this much unless they're getting paid. And everyone said, you're getting paid by Monsanto. He said, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And then someone did like a Freedom of Information, whatever it was. And the university was compelled to share his emails publicly. And yes, he was getting thousands of dollars from Monsanto and others to do scientific communication, science communication, which is just dressing up corporate propaganda and marketing as science. And science, for a lot of people, has become this demented, bizarro religion that you're not allowed to question, even though real science is nothing but questioning. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a religion. It's a secular
and you can't
religion.
talk to people like that. I've had people like, no, Brian, science is perfect. Politics is flawed. Science is perfect. Scientists, there's peer review. There's no way for them to lie. You got to be kidding me. Yeah, you've got to be kidding me.
Well, no, but the thing is, you're talking about the big pharma and big agro the corruption going on is an extension of what I mentioned before, that malignant moral vision, a notion that whatever is good for me and I don't get caught or don't have to pay too much is okay. And if it hurts other people, that's not my problem. They should take care of themselves. That's the malignant moral vision that we're living in, and we see it with these corporate behemoths, especially because we've created the conditions whereby we have monopolies and oligopolies across the board in all of these industries, and they are all acting equally immorally, equally to their own benefit and not to the benefit of the people, of the consumer. I remember, in '82, when I was 14 years old, 14, and there was the whole cyanide and Tylenol capsule thing, right? And the CEO of Tylenol, as soon as it came out, he yanked the entire stock of Tylenol off the shelves, because he said, I'm not going to allow my product to potentially cause harm to some random individual. And he yanked it all. And he explained it very transparently in a big article, a big full-page ads in the New York Times, saying exactly what they were doing to ensure that their product didn't harm other people. And the guy was willing to take the hit on the stock market price and potentially even lose his job, because he believed, and I would agree with this belief, that the well-being of the consumer of these products was far above the well-being of the corporation that was providing these consumer goods. And of course, under his auspices, they created the security cap and all the rest of the security measures so that drugs couldn't be tampered with, which is a laudable thing. Today, if the same kind of crisis happened, Tylenol or whatever other medication would be fighting tooth and nail and saying, no, our products are perfectly safe. And
they would tell the regulators, they would bribe the regulators to raise the acceptable amount of arsenic in your daily diet. Because again, Johnson and Johnson had asbestos in their baby powder. For years and years, they knew about it. They deliberately lied to the public. They hid it from regulators, and then they influenced the government to, not do any research, not make any move to scrutinize the amount of asbestos in certain types of products. And they were successful. They successfully did this, which tells you what? Which tells you that the regulators are not actually regulators. They are part of the marketing. They create the veneer of safety, efficacy, and necessity when none of it actually could possibly exist, and none of it might actually exist. And yet the regulators make you think it is, because they're working with the corporations. And that is a Reuters. That's Reuters. So everything that we go over will be from either the Department of Justice or a mainstream Western news agency like Reuters, coming out and admitting this. And then at the same time, Reuters will come back now during a certain health crisis, and they will tell you you're crazy if you think that these people can't be trusted, when they themselves have exposed these people as serial criminals who are knowingly killing people and then paying people off who are supposed to stop this from happening to help them cover it up. That this is what's going on. It's a huge problem.
Yeah, and also, talking about the malady and the medication, we all know what we're talking about, right? People are finally starting to wake up that the medication is pernicious. And they're like, how did you know? Well, it was fucking obvious, man. I mean, what the fuck?
Like, dude.
It's like me once,
this guy who's a crackhead gambler. I caught him smoking crack and gambling. How did you know? Well, he's a crackhead gambler. What else is he going to be doing? That's all Big Pharma does. They're not here to help you. And the thing that's scary is that human healthcare is important. Medication, things like vaccines, these are all like really important things. They're so important that serial criminals should not be allowed to be involved in any step of the process. Yeah. But they dominate it. That is the problem.
Well, I think that the psychopaths are running the whole fucking show in just about every area that you look at.
Yes.
I mean, to circle back, as Jen Psaki always says, to circle back to the conflict in Ukraine. Oh, fucking incompetent psychopaths. But that's the thing that bothers me the most, I have to admit. I don't mind if they're psychopaths or sociopaths or whatever's the correct terminology, so long as they're capable, so long as they win, But they don't win. That's the worst part. And we fritter away everything that has been built. For quite a number of years now, I thought that the American regime was collapsing. But I didn't think that it was going to be this quick of a collapse, because you're seeing this across the board. You have a completely porous southern border in the United States, and now you're having these drug cartels starting to have drug wars in the streets of Phoenix and Albuquerque and shit. the United States is like fucking collapsing, and there's something too. In chat, I want your input on this. Okay, how could I put this? This is going to sound weird. Okay, and perhaps, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because I want to know if perhaps I'm feeling this because I'm too close to all the minutia of the conflict and everything going on in the rest of the world. But don't you feel sometimes that something enormous is on its way? That we're sort of like almost biding our time for some enormous event that is kind of going to break, I mean, something on some unimaginable scale. I mean, chat, hit me with a +1 if you sometimes feel this way, as if you feel like you're like a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, that any second now, something enormous is going to break that's going to affect everyone around the world. I can't imagine what it is, but I feel that way. I mean, there's some, and look, I know that this is goofy. Okay, I admit it. It's goofy. Okay, fine. I'm a goofball. I'm a weirdo. Tinfoil hat. Fine. But don't you feel sometimes that there's something huge on its way that's about to break around on our heads collectively?
Someone in the, actually, I've seen this a couple of times about EMP, electromagnetic pulse, and
no,
actually, I don't know.
Bigger.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know who said it. There was someone in the media who said the Chinese balloon could be holding an EMP device and it's gonna black out all of America or something. I just want to put this out here and warn people. If you don't believe me, go look it up. There's the same group of neocons who coincidentally made the most out of 9/11. They have been talking about EMP. So before they were saying Iran is going to use an EMP on America. Something tells me they have an EMP sitting around and they're just like waiting to set it off and blame someone. I just get that impression. Go look it up and you tell me when you see them. First it's Iran, now it's China. I mean, why would they do that? What would the purpose of that be? Why would they do that? And again, like if you look at what's going on between the U.S. and China, look at a map of where U.S. bases are. They have China surrounded with military bases. They claim that they have U.S. troops in Taiwan, which the U.S. government simultaneously recognizes as part of One China, because they officially recognize the One China policy, and they send their ships between the strait, the Taiwan Strait. They're doing everything imaginable to provoke China. China is not doing this back to the United States. So people have to keep this in mind. And then when they talk about an EMP, why would China out of the blue just detonate an EMP over the United States? It makes no sense at all. Time is on their side.
But do you agree
time is not on
me?
America's side.
I mean, look, I'm talking fuzzy, weird intuition kind of shit. But do you feel this? Because a lot of people in the chat hit me with a +1 on this particular issue, that there's something fucking huge on the way. And you know, because look, there is the notion of a collective unconscious. And there is the idea, and it's been seen repeatedly, of synchronicity. You know, the famous Police album, but synchronicity was a concept developed by Carl Jung, where multiple people feel that something is on the horizon. And many times, multiple people come up with the same idea almost simultaneously. The most famous example is Newton and Leibniz, who simultaneously and completely independent one of the other invented calculus. And so there's the feel on a unconscious level. I'm not going to push the issue, okay? But it just seems something's up. By the way, you mentioned Iran. What do you think of these Israeli attacks on Iran?
This has been going on forever. And again, this is another instance where all Iran has to do is bide its time, keep building up its capabilities. Again, the disparity between their capabilities and what the U.S. had. The window has already closed for the U.S. in terms of waging some kind of Iraq-style war on Iran. And so, you know, this is just an Israel attacks Iran, Israel attacks Syria. And I don't want to get into Israel because this is one of these issues where people have completely lost their minds over it. It is a client regime of the United States. Look at its economy. And please explain to me how Israel is somehow controlling the United States. It is not. It is the other way around. Israel is just one of many client regimes the U.S. Has around the world. An empire has its, and they'll say, what about the lobbyists? An empire has its court, and the lobbyists are who come and exist inside the modern imperial court of the United States. So anyway, they're just going to keep doing this because they don't know what else to do. They hope they can provoke something, maybe get something going, but I don't think that it's going to work. Iran has been very resilient. They have been building up their capabilities, and they have been using them very wisely. And at the end of the day, I mean, people, I just saw in the comment section, China's bullying everyone, even in Southeast Asia. I'm in Southeast Asia. No, China is not bullying anybody here. And Iran doesn't want to wipe Israel off the map. So, people got to wake up. These things where did you hear that they're bullying them? Did you come here and see it? Or did you hear it from the same people that told you there were WMDs in Iraq? People really got to wise up, because if you get even half of it, you're way ahead of a lot of people in the general public. But the fact that you still, for whatever reason, are inclined to believe anything that they say just because it's about some group of people you don't like, that says something about, that reflects poorly on you. Not, it's that if you get fooled by someone else, that reflects on the person fooling you, but you can see that they're liars, and yet you're allowing them to fool you. Why? That is the question.
Yeah, well, people, I think that on one level, people want to be fooled because it gives them a story about the world that is comforting to them, and most important of all, it flatters them into thinking that they're still number one. It's kind of like, someone's house is flooding. No, that's not going to be a good metaphor, but it's like the American empire is collapsing, but with these stories, they can hold on to the illusion, the America number one. And it's just so sad, They don't recognize that the United States has been completely hollowed out. It's just tragic. And I think that the worst part is the lot of the average American citizen. He's saddled with debt. He has these mandatory insurances that eat a huge chunk out of their monthly income. They're on a perpetual debt wheel that they can't get out of, like a hamster wheel. And they have no possibility of forming families of their own, of being able to afford children. And so they just lead these very sad, hedonistic lives. And it's not even that their hedonism is particularly spectacular. I mean, it's not like, going to some orgy with satin curtains or something like that and taking the best drugs. No, it's like zoning out with video games for 8 hours a day, or porn, or whatever the hell. It's just a miserable existence in the United States, a product of the United States industry having been hollowed out, the financialization of it, how the top 10% of the population, the top 5% of the population living high on the hog, and everybody else just getting scraps. And the worst part, I think, is the constant anxiety, because I think to myself, if I were earning the average wage in the United States, $57,000 a year, that's the average family income, before taxes, you wouldn't be able to do anything with that level of income. You'd be just running to keep place, and your place would be fairly miserable. And that's the lot for the average American. And they don't seem to realize that it's their own leaders who have created the conditions whereby they live this desperate existence. Nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to notice. And they talk about China and Russia, evil Putin.
It's their fault. It's their fault. Yeah, they took our jobs.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't really blame them, because a lot of these people they're born into it. There are no role models for them to follow. Human beings learn by seeing and doing. So on one hand, on the other hand, there's a lot of information out there available to people. It is possible to wake up from this and to change your situation. I mean, I admitted I was an ignorant American who knew not nothing, but next to nothing about a lot of things I should have known better. And I had to go through a very painful process of waking up and kind of relearning everything. It's possible, and I guess that's kind of what we're trying to do here. I mean, that's why we have these conversations.
Yeah.
That's why we do what we do, because we want to help other people see these things.
See the reality as it actually is. So I'm going to wind down this live stream because Brian's got to go. And chat, I just wanted to leave you with a final thought insofar as this broadcast is concerned. In 20 minutes, my newest video is appearing on my GL Again channel. Brian, why don't you tell where you're going to be at in 20 minutes? Is it a broadcast?
Well, this is Donbas Davushka. It's a podcast, but they record it and then they put it up later. If you follow me on Telegram or on Twitter, I think I could share it on Twitter also. I'm pretty sure. Then you can listen to it on Spotify.
Yeah, put me in touch with her or them, because
sure
on their show, and have them on my roundtable as well, because I've been following.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, because there's several members of the team, and they're all, they all have their focus and specialty. I think that would be great to have them on all together, or have a couple of them on with a couple of other people from elsewhere. I mean, there's a lot of mix and match you can do there. Yeah,
I'd love to. So please put in a good word for me. And insofar as the final thought I want to leave you guys with is that, the balloon is just priming the ground, seeding the soil, if you will, for a conflict with China, which, from the scheduling that we're getting, it seems to be 2025 U.S.-China war. Is that accurate at this time, Brian?
I would say they're already out of time. When winning looks like all life and industry is scoured off the face of Taiwan. The U.S. lost multiple aircraft carriers, tens of thousands of sailors and airmen, and hundreds of jets, but they won because China's amphibious invasion was somehow foiled. That sounds like you still lost to me. So I don't know. Someone's asking multiple times, have I seen Pentagon Wars? I have not seen it, but I'm aware of the entire process and the background of the Bradley fighting vehicle, which we will see for ourselves if and when it arrives in Ukraine. We will unfortunately watch how that turns out.
That Bradley fighting vehicle is never going to roll in Ukraine. I think it'll be over before they get around to it, but who knows? Yeah. Anyway, chat, when you show up my wonderful guest with a +1 or a BB, better BB+ for Brian Berletic. And it's been a pleasure being with you all. I hope you guys enjoyed this very, very impromptu stream that wouldn't have happened had it not been that Brian begged me. Brian begged me, he was like, please let me be on your show. I need more exposure. And I'm like, okay. I'm teasing, of course. It's always Brian. It's always a delight. Stick around after I end the broadcast, just to say a few final words. Thank you very much, chat, for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast, and I will catch you next time. Take it easy.